There are probably three good ones that you could build into your answer here. IAS 36 in relation to impairments, IAS 1 in relation to the presentation of material that is unusual in respect of presenting these specific events that have occurred during the year, and perhaps one that is most commonly seen within P7 is IAS 37 on provisions. Have all three conditions in order to satisfy a provision been met in relation to these facts? Now, in terms of talking about the specifics of bits of evidence that we should be working towards, the evidence that we're looking for is the next thing. Have our team done the bit that they should have done in order to satisfy ourselves that these standards have been dealt with appropriately and the way they're reflected within the financial statements is true and fair? This is where you now, as the reviewer, are checking through the work that your minions have done to make sure that it matches up with what you believe is enough for you then to say to the person above, who's the partner, who's going to sign off and say that the accounts show a true and fair view. This is where audit evidence becomes important. So, for example, you might want to have a look about what impact regulatory problems might face. Obtaining a copy of the regulatory licence that the mine possesses to establish what sort of minimum service requirements there are, what sort of penalties or fines there might be in relation to things going wrong, would be the first thing that you would look for. Next, you would try and establish the degree of non-disclosure and whether or not that might attract any kind of fines. We might have to consider where we get the details in relation to the damage, the impact, the cost. This is where some sort of surveyor's report, some sort of information supporting what we know about this particular accident to clarify the fact that we're dealing with facts and not supposition. We then need to try and get some idea from perhaps correspondence with solicitors or representations from directors or forecasts or bills or something of that sort, which provides us with an indication of how much money it's going to cost in future to deal with the fact that we've got changes to the mine in terms of the impairments. We've got to do some remedial work to the ground above. We've got to pay for the cost of relocating members of the public. And we've also maybe got to think about further problems in relation to associated fines that might come our way. We might want to try and establish, we're told that there were no accidents in relation to members of staff being injured, but it might not be a bad idea for us to verify that by means of an accident book or other health and safety records that might be present. Finally, in order to try and address the issues concerning the evidence that's available to us in terms of going concern, we might want to try and seek management representations that would give an indication that the company is considered still a viable going concern. We might want to review board minutes for this purpose, possibly even obtain copies of forecasts or prospective financial information that supports where we believe this particular business is going and that it does have a future. Okay, that's the sort of issues that you should have considered when trying to put together an answer. How well did you do? Well, the marking rubric that the examining team supplies after each sitting is usually very comprehensive, and you'd expect for a question of this sort, if you fully developed a point within a context of a well-argued sentence with a beginning, a middle and an end, that you'd usually get a mark for each of the points that you'd raised. So in this instance, you'll probably find that a well-balanced answer would have needed about 14 things in order to score the 14 marks. And I think, judging by the things that we've just talked about, you could probably have found 14 things fairly easily. Don't forget, though, that your knowledge of the standard is always going to be important, and you've no way of guaranteeing that this sort of thing will be replicated. Another thing which I think is quite important for you to draw out when trying to consider how well you got on is to think a bit about the role that the examining team plays. Now, as you've picked up, my name's Steve, and this is a digging context, so we have to talk about digging. My children are very much into Minecraft. At this time that this particular question was set, Minecraft was very much the popular thing for kids of that age to get involved in. So, as a man called Steve, I've got to dig deeper and play the Minecraft card at this stage here. And I think this is a key part of what the examining team's comments fed back through the examiner's reports that you can get access to online that suggested that candidates started well but didn't dig deep enough. They didn't go further than just considering the fact that the mine was impaired, or they didn't go beyond the fact that there was a going concern issue. And I think to get a full, thorough set of marks, you've got to explore fully and you've got to dig as deep as you can into the scenario and think about all the various aspects that could be affected by the situation as presented. The examining team did point out within their comments that, as well as not digging deep enough into the scenario, a lot of candidates displayed some poor financial knowledge, some poor financial reporting awareness even. For example, illustration of something that the examining team mentioned in the report was that candidates wrote that there should be a provision for lost revenue, which is plainly crazy. Similarly, also, audit evidence that was suggested by candidates was of not sufficient quality. For example, suggesting simply that there should be discussions with management or that items should be properly disclosed. Neither of those is done in enough detail in order to score or attract adequate marks. And so unless you write fully and thoroughly, you won't score the marks you need to survive. Okay, I want to try and finish off by thinking about conclusions that you can draw from this, hopefully having attempted this question yourself, and from this presentation that you can take on further. There are, I think, a number of issues that you can draw out when trying to think about an approach for a matters to consider and evidence to be looking out for that you can build for any other subsequent type of this question that you attempt in future. Materiality. How much does this matter? What are the risks presented? What parts of the financial statements could be affected? What do the standards tell us about how these should be represented? And then what sort of evidence should we be looking for in order to make sure that this has been attractively and appropriately treated within the way we do what we do? Finally, in terms of that evidence, I also want to try and get you to remember that there are certain things that the examining team is looking out for. That if you want to write, say, that something is of sufficient calibre and quality in terms of your answer, you can't just say, check that this has been disclosed, obtain management representations, read board minutes. Those alone are not going to be enough. What you want to be saying is what you're doing, why you're doing it, how you're doing it, where you have to go in order to do it, who you might have to speak to in order to do it, and what kind of documentation you're looking for. There are 6 things that you could build in. Not every procedure will have that, but you would expect evidence and procedures to reflect those. Finally, the most important message I can leave you with after having considered materiality, risks, standards and evidence is to think about reflection and the role that that plays in how you can learn from your own performance every time you do a question. Think about what you wrote, what was good, and try and do more of it. Think about what you wrote which wasn't enough, and do even more of that next time. And think about the comments that the examining team have made within their reports so that you can then build a little bit more on those for the next time you do it. So there's a few suggestions for you for when you're going to do P7. All it remains for me to do is to wish you the very best of luck when it's your turn to do P7, and I hope you can bear in mind some of these thoughts when you actually go through it and do it yourself. Thanks for your time today, and I wish you the very best of luck. Bye now.